He was a factory worker. Some years later, she discovered he was a bigamist. I remember I told that story at the graduation at the University of Utah. Nobody thought it was that strange. See that? I probably offended somebody. Now, everybody knows they don't do that in Utah anymore. Now it's Texas. But anyway. She thought it was very, very strange. So we moved from Detroit to Boston. And to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multi-family dwelling. Boarded up windows and doors, sirens and gangs, murders. I remember seeing people lying on the ground with bullet holes and stab wounds waiting to die. Both of my older cousins were killed. I never expected to get to be more than 25 years old. That's the kind of environment it was. And, you know, my mother was out working 2, 3 jobs at a time as a domestic, cleaning other people's houses because she didn't want to be on welfare. Even though she had only a 3rd grade education, she was very observant. She noticed that no one she ever saw go on welfare came off of it. So she didn't want that life for herself. Yep. She didn't want that for us. And she said she would work as long and as hard as was necessary in order to be able to have a different life. And eventually, after a few years, we were able to move back to Detroit. Still in a multi-family dwelling, still with significant wildlife, but nevertheless, you know, she was independent, and I was a 5th grade student. And I was the worst student you could imagine. I was horrible. But the other kids loved having me in the classroom because I was what's known as the safety net. No one ever had to worry about getting the lowest mark on anything as long as I was there. So they enjoyed my presence. But, you know, I must say that I did admire the kids who were smart, who always seemed to have the answers. And I just didn't feel that I had the ability. And sometimes I didn't even try very hard. But, you know, my mother believed in me when nobody else did. And she was always saying, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home these grades. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that. And she was encouraging. And, but she didn't know what to do. And she prayed. She asked God for wisdom. And you know, you don't have to have a PhD to ask God, do you? You just have to have faith. And she said, help me to help my sons understand the importance of developing their brains so they can control their own lives. And he gave her the wisdom. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was all that wise. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom was that? As far as we were concerned, it was child abuse. But at any rate, she said we could watch 2 to 3 TV programs during the week, and with all that spare time, we had to read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries and submit to her written book reports, which she could read, but we didn't know that. She would put little check marks and underline and highlight and stuff. Everything she was reading. And I despised it. Everybody else was out having a good time. But, you know, the interesting thing is people ask me all the time, well, why did you do it? Why did you do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Back in those days, the parents were in charge. You had to do what they said. As simple as that. There was no social psychologist sitting there saying, let the kid express themselves, you know. So we had to do it. But anyway, you know, after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading the books because between the covers of those books, even though we were desperately poor, never had money for anything, I could go anywhere in the world, I could be anybody, I could do anything. I began to imagine myself in laboratories conducting experiments, reading about all kinds of exotic things. Pretty soon I knew stuff that nobody else knew. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to laugh and call me dummy. The same ones who called me dummy in the 5th grade would come to me in the 7th grade and say, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But you know, the key thing is I had a very different impression of who I was. I had the same brain in the 5th grade that I had in the 7th grade. But I used it in a different way. But you know, here's the interesting thing. If you have a normal brain, you can do virtually anything because you were made in the image of God. And God is no dummy. You think about what He gave us. This brain, billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections. It remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard. It can process more than 2 million bits of information per second. Think about that. Now, how many of you remember what you had for dinner last night? Let me just see a hand. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, people were not drinking, that's good. Now, what did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Almost instantly. I'll give you an example of how sophisticated your brain is. Well, first of all, the sound waves have to leave my lips, travel through the air, into your external auditory meatus, travel out to your tympanic membrane, central vibratory force, which travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the over and round on the central vibratory force and the end of the lymph, mechanically distort the microcillia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which travel across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction, from there to the superior olivary nucleus, ascending bilaterally up the brainstem to the lamina meniscus, to the inferior colliculus and the median geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiations to the posterior temporal lobe to the venic auditory process, and from there to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract of big choosing memory from the medial hippocampal structure and memory bodies back to the frontal lobes to start the motor response at the bed cell level, coming down the cortical spinal crack, across the internal capsule into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervical medullary devastation into the spinal brain matter, synapsing there, going out to a neuromuscular junction, stimulating the nerve and the muscle. So you could raise your hand. That's the simplified version. See if you can get one of those rap singers to do that. But anyway. But you know, if your brain can do all that, you barely even have to think about it. Can you imagine what the human brain is capable of when we actually put our minds to something? It's really something to think about. Well, you would think that having gotten all that under control, that I was going to have a cakewalk. Wrong. Because you see, I still had that horrendous temper. I was one of those people who thought they had a lot of rights. If you know somebody who thinks they have a lot of rights, you know somebody who's angry all the time because somebody's always infringing upon their rights. I remember once a fellow hit me with a pebble. It didn't hurt, but I was incensed that he would dare hit me with a pebble. I picked up a large rock, hurled it at his face, broke his glasses, almost put his eye out. Another time, a fellow was trying to close my locker. I didn't want to close. I struck him in the forehead with my fist. Unfortunately, still had the lock in the hand. Put a 3-inch gash in his forehead. My mother was trying to get me to wear something. I didn't want to wear it. I picked up a hammer, went to hit her in the head with it. Fortunately, my brother caught it from behind before it found its mark. Other than that, I was a pretty good kid. But you can see how that temper can really get things going. And when I was 14, I tried to stab another youngster with a large knife, and he had a large metal belt buckle, and the knife blade struck it with such force that it broke. And he fled in terror, but I was more terrified than he, as I realized that there I was trying to kill somebody over nothing. And I ran and locked myself in the bathroom. And I started contemplating my life. I had turned things around.